Story 1. Lizzie Borden House, the haunting legacy of blood and shadows. The Lizzie Borden House in Fall River, Massachusetts, is infamous for the brutal murders that occurred within its walls on August 4, 1892. Andrew and Abby Borden, Lizzie's father and stepmother, were found hacked to death, their skulls shattered by repeated blows from a hatchet. The crime, brutal and savage, shocked the nation, but the real horror began after the court acquitted Lizzie, leaving a dark cloud of suspicion and mystery that continues to envelop the house to this day. From the outside, the house appears deceptively normal, a modest New England structure that could be any family's home. But upon entering, it becomes immediately apparent that something is very, very wrong. The air is heavy, thick with an unseen presence, and even the bravest visitors feel the prickling sensation of being watched from the moment they cross the threshold. The house has not changed much since that fateful day. Furniture remains eerily similar, the wallpaper peeling in places, as if the building itself is slowly decaying under the weight of its grisly history. Many who visit the house are drawn to the parlor, where Andrew Borden's body was found slumped on a sofa, his face brutally disfigured by blows from a hatchet. The room is unnervingly quiet, but it is the kind of silence that seems to pulse with tension. Guests report feeling sudden drops in temperature, seeing flickers of movement in their peripheral vision, or hearing the faint sound of footsteps from above, even when no one else is in the house. Some claim that if you sit on the sofa long enough, you can still feel the cold presence of Andrew himself, as if his spirit lingers, forever trapped in the place where he was murdered. Then there's the upstairs guest room, where Abby Borden met her gruesome end. It is in this room that many visitors claim to experience the most terrifying paranormal encounters. Abby's spirit is said to manifest at the foot of the bed where she was killed, her form shadowy but unmistakable. She appears bent over, as if reliving the moments before her death, and those who have dared to sleep in this room often wake in the middle of the night to a suffocating pressure on their chest, as though Abby's ghost is pressing down on them. Her desperation palpable as she searches for answers that will never come. The most unnerving experiences, however, are often tied to the bedroom of Lizzie Borden herself. This room, where she spent her nights after being accused of the murders, holds an almost tangible darkness. People speak of hearing whispered voices, a low murmur that grows louder the closer they get to the door. Some claim to have seen Lizzie's shadow pass across the walls, always just out of sight, but leaving behind a chilling sense of malevolence. The temperature in her room is said to drop suddenly, the air growing icy cold, even in the height of summer, as if the very essence of Lizzie's tortured soul still resides there, wrapped in guilt or rage. But the supernatural activity is not confined to the house alone. The basement, a dark and dank space filled with old, rusted tools and long-forgotten relics, has its own terrifying history. Many believe that the hatchet used in the murders was hidden here, and though it was never found, the basement remains a place of deep unease. People often hear strange sounds, scraping, like metal dragging across stone, or the distant echo of a woman's laughter. Some have even reported seeing ghostly figures standing at the far end of the basement, always watching, always waiting. The haunting of the Lizzie Borden house is not merely confined to ghostly apparitions or eerie sounds. Many who visit or stay the night report vivid nightmares that feel too real to be dreams. These visions often replay the murders in gruesome detail, as if the house itself forces its visitors to relive the horror over and over again. There are those who wake in a cold sweat, feeling as though someone or something was in the room with them, standing over them, watching them with unseen eyes. And then there are the marks. Several guests have reported waking with scratches or bruises on their bodies, with no explanation as to how they appeared, as though the spirits in the house had physically reached out to them in their sleep. One of the most chilling phenomena involves the old, dusty mirrors scattered throughout the house. Several visitors have claimed that when they glance into one of these mirrors, they do not see their own reflection, but instead the figure of Lizzie standing behind them, her face pale and emotionless, her eyes dark and empty. Some have seen the reflections of Andrew or Abby, their faces twisted in agony as if reliving their final moments, their mouths open in silent screams. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the Lizzie Borden house is the inexplicable feeling that something is always just out of sight. Guests report seeing fleeting shadows at the edge of their vision, or hearing faint, disembodied voices calling out their names. Objects move on their own, doors slam shut without warning, and there is a pervasive sense that the house is alive, aware of those who enter, and eager to claim more victims. Many have tried to explain the supernatural occurrences within the house. Perhaps the spirits of the Bordens, restless and angry, still linger, seeking justice or revenge. Or perhaps it is something darker, something that the murders awakened, a malevolent force that now resides in the very walls of the house, feeding off the fear and suffering of those who dare to step inside. Whatever the cause, one thing is certain: the Lizzie Borden house is not a place for the faint of heart. It is a place where the past refuses to stay buried, where the dead still walk among the living, and where the shadow of the hatchet looms large over all who dare to enter its doors. And for those brave enough to stay the night, the house promises only one thing: they will never leave the same as they came. Story 2. The Haunting of Edinburgh Castle, Shadows of War and Torture. Edinburgh Castle, perched high on a rocky crag in the heart of Scotland, is a place steeped in history, bloodshed, and tragedy. For centuries, it has been a stronghold of kings, a prison for the condemned, and a battlefield for those caught in the fury of war. But what truly sets Edinburgh Castle apart isn't just its long and violent past. It's the countless souls said to still linger within its ancient walls, trapped between worlds, unable to find peace. Visitors to the castle have reported feeling an unsettling presence, a cold breath on the back of their necks, and the unmistakable sense that they are never truly alone. One of the most chilling tales is that of the prisoners who were once held and tortured in the castle's dungeons. Shackled and starved, these unfortunate souls met cruel and agonizing deaths. The dungeons themselves are a labyrinth of stone corridors, dimly lit by flickering torches. The air is heavy, and every footstep echoes ominously in the dark. Some visitors claim to hear the moans and cries of those long-dead prisoners echoing through the stone chambers, their voices distorted by centuries of pain. It's said that if you listen closely enough, you can still hear the sound of chains rattling, dragging across the cold floors as if the spirits are still shackled in their torment. The most notorious of these ghostly prisoners is the specter of a faceless man, a tortured soul who wanders the dungeons aimlessly, his face obscured as if it had been torn away during his imprisonment. Those unfortunate enough to encounter this apparition are left with an overwhelming sense of dread, and some have reported feeling hands, cold, strong, and invisible, clawing at their skin, as if the man is trying to pull them into the darkness with him. His presence is always announced by a sudden drop in temperature, the air becoming so cold that it burns, freezing your breath in your lungs. But it's not just the dungeons that are haunted. Deep within the castle, the ancient hallways twist and turn, hiding secrets older than anyone can remember. Soldiers have reported sightings of a spectral drummer boy who appears just before a tragedy strikes. His face, like that of the faceless prisoner, is never seen. His head is said to be missing entirely, a gruesome remnant of a decapitation during the brutal wars of Scotland's past. His drumming, an eerie, hollow beat, echoes through the halls at night, growing louder as danger approaches. Legend says that those who hear the drumming are doomed to witness catastrophe. The battlements of Edinburgh Castle have seen countless battles, and some of the soldiers who fought and died here seem unable to leave the fight behind. It's not uncommon for visitors to catch glimpses of ghostly soldiers marching in formation along the parapets, their forms transparent, their faces grim and determined. These spectral warriors are often seen on foggy nights, their armor clinking softly as they patrol the walls, ever vigilant, ever ready for a battle that never ends. They vanish as quickly as they appear, leaving only the cold wind in their wake. And then there is the spirit of Lady Janet Douglas of Glamis, one of the castle's most tragic figures. Accused of witchcraft in the 16th century, Lady Douglas was burned at the stake in the castle's courtyard. Her spirit is said to still roam the grounds, her anguished cries heard in the dead of night. Many who visit the courtyard speak of feeling a sudden and inexplicable sadness, as if the weight of her unjust death presses down on them. Some even report seeing the figure of a woman in a long gown, moving silently through the shadows, her face contorted in pain and sorrow, disappearing just as they approach. One of the most spine-chilling hauntings is said to occur in the castle's Great Hall. The hall itself is grand and imposing, with high ceilings and towering stone columns, but it's the oppressive atmosphere that unnerves visitors. At night, when the hall is empty, the sounds of battle can sometimes be heard: clashing swords, the guttural cries of soldiers in combat, and the faint, haunting call of bagpipes. These are the echoes of battles long since fought, yet somehow imprinted on the very stones of the castle. Those who have experienced this eerie phenomenon describe a strange sensation of being watched, as if the spirits of fallen warriors are reliving their final moments in an endless loop, forever trapped in the horrors of war. One of the castle's more elusive spirits is the ghost of a young piper who was sent into the tunnels beneath the castle centuries ago. His task was simple: play his bagpipes as he explored the dark, winding passages so that those above ground could track his progress. But somewhere deep in the bowels of the earth, his music stopped. A search party was sent in after him, but no trace of the boy was ever found. Now, on particularly quiet nights, visitors to the castle sometimes hear the faint strains of a lone piper playing from beneath the castle, his tune mournful and haunting, as if he's still lost in the darkness, calling for help that will never come. Perhaps the most terrifying apparition at Edinburgh Castle is that of the executioner. Dressed in a black hood and carrying an axe, this specter has been seen in the castle's execution chamber. His presence is always accompanied by the unmistakable scent of burning flesh and the metallic tang of blood in the air. Those who encounter him report a suffocating sense of dread, as if they're about to be sentenced to their deaths. The executioner is said to appear to those who are at their most vulnerable, his shadow looming large before disappearing into thin air. As the night deepens and the fog rolls in, Edinburgh Castle becomes a place where the line between the living and the dead blurs. The air grows thick with the weight of centuries of violence, betrayal, and death. Those brave enough to visit after dark often leave with more than just stories of history. They leave with the feeling that they were not alone, that something ancient and restless still walks the stone corridors, watching, waiting for its next victim. Story 3. The Haunting of Old Charleston Jail, the Legend of Lavinia Fisher. The old Charleston Jail looms ominously over the cobblestone streets of Charleston, South Carolina, a testament to the city's dark and twisted past. Constructed in the 18th century, this crumbling edifice has housed some of the most notorious criminals in the region, its very walls steeped in tales of anguish, despair, and malevolence. But amid the whispered stories of violence and betrayal, one spirit rises above the rest: Lavinia Fisher, a woman whose tragic fate became legend. Lavinia, a captivating beauty, was born into a world of strife and hardship. As she grew, so too did her cunning nature. In the early 19th century, she and her husband John Fisher operated a small inn just outside Charleston, known for its hospitality and home-cooked meals. But beneath the surface of this charming facade lay a sinister secret. The couple lured travelers into their inn, only for Lavinia to poison them with meals laced with deadly arsenic. As guests vanished without a trace, whispers of the couple's malevolence spread through the community like wildfire. As the years went by, the once bustling inn became a shadowy place, drawing in weary travelers with promises of warmth and safety. Yet, one by one, they disappeared, swallowed by the darkness that loomed over the property. The townsfolk began to speculate about the fate of those who had vanished. Was it merely coincidence, or was Lavinia Fisher playing a cruel game of life and death? She became the subject of whispered rumors, a figure shrouded in mystery and malice. But fate has a way of catching up with the wicked. In 1820, a man named John W. McDaniel, who had stayed at the inn, went missing. His family, frantic with worry, pressed the local authorities to investigate. Their inquiries uncovered a trail of bones and artifacts that led directly to the Fishers' Inn. The local sheriff, driven by the relentless pursuit of justice, gathered enough evidence to arrest Lavinia and John. During the trial that gripped Charleston, Lavinia's charm faded, replaced by a chilling presence. The community was transfixed by her beauty and her chilling confession that if not for the gallows, she would continue her reign of terror. Convicted of murder, Lavinia Fisher was sentenced to die. The day of her execution became a grim spectacle, with crowds flocking to witness the fate of the woman who had haunted their nightmares. On the gallows, she stood defiantly, her spirit unbroken. As the noose tightened around her neck, Lavinia declared, "If any of you have a message for the devil, tell him I am coming." Her words echoed through the crowd, a promise of vengeance that would linger long after her death. Yet death did not bring her the peace she sought. Legend has it that Lavinia's spirit remains trapped within the walls of the old Charleston jail, eternally bound to the site of her gruesome demise. Those who dare to enter the crumbling prison often report strange occurrences, as if the very walls themselves are alive with her presence. Shadows dance in the flickering light, and cold drafts sweep through the corridors, sending chills down the spines of even the bravest souls. Visitors to the jail have recounted chilling tales of their encounters with Lavinia's ghost. Some claim to have seen the apparition of a woman in a long, tattered dress, wandering through the dimly lit cells, her face obscured by darkness. As they approach, an overwhelming sense of dread washes over them, as if Lavinia's sorrow and anger are palpable in the air. It is said that she roams the corridors at night, searching for the souls of those she once ensnared, forever seeking revenge for her unjust execution. One particularly brave group of ghost hunters ventured into the jail, equipped with cameras and ghost-detecting equipment. As they entered the darkened halls, a chill settled over them, thick with anticipation. They set up their equipment in the execution chamber, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. As they waited, a cold breeze swept through the room, and they felt a shift in the atmosphere. Suddenly, their equipment began to malfunction, lights flickering ominously. Then in the darkness, they heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible yet unmistakable. "Help me." The voice seemed to echo off the walls, drawing them deeper into the heart of the jail. The group exchanged nervous glances, their hearts racing as they followed the sound. It led them to a small cell, its heavy door creaking as they opened it. Inside, the temperature plummeted and the scent of roses, an aroma associated with Lavinia, filled the air, enveloping them like a shroud. In that moment, they felt her presence, the weight of her sorrow and fury pressing against them. They turned their cameras on, hoping to capture her spirit, but all they found were flickering shadows. Suddenly, a loud bang reverberated through the hall, and the cell door slammed shut, trapping them inside. Panic surged through the group as they struggled to open the door, but it would not budge. In their frantic attempts to escape, they could hear Lavinia's laughter, a chilling sound that echoed off the stone walls, a cruel reminder that they were at the mercy of a restless spirit. After what felt like an eternity, the door finally swung open, as if released by an unseen hand. The group stumbled out, shaken to their core. As they fled the jail, the last thing they heard was a soft, haunting melody, a lullaby sung by Lavinia, echoing through the corridors, weaving its way into their nightmares. But Lavinia's haunting didn't stop there. Staff members and caretakers of the jail have their own spine-chilling encounters. One night, a guard on duty reported hearing a soft sobbing sound echoing through the halls. Drawn to the noise, he found himself standing before a cell that had been empty for decades. As he peered inside, the sobbing abruptly stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence. The air thickened, and he felt an icy breeze brush past him, the distinct smell of roses filling the room once more, leaving him breathless with fear. Another employee recounted an incident while closing the jail for the night. She was making her rounds when she felt someone tugging at her sleeve. When she turned, no one was there, but a cold breath washed over her. The sensation was as if someone stood right behind her, watching, waiting. Heart racing, she hurried to the exit, but as she reached for the door, she caught a glimpse of a figure in a long dress in the corner of her eye, a fleeting shadow that vanished the moment she turned her head. Lavinia's story continues to captivate those who visit the old Charleston jail, drawing in ghost hunters, thrill seekers, and the curious alike. Each encounter with her spirit seems to deepen the mystery of her life and death, a haunting reminder of the woman who once held sway over life and death. As the clock strikes midnight, the old Charleston jail transforms into a realm of shadows and whispers. Those who dare to enter are forever changed, marked by the haunting presence of Lavinia Fisher, a tragic figure forever entwined with the echoes of her past. Her spirit, a reminder of love, betrayal, and the unquenchable thirst for vengeance, lingers on, waiting for the next soul brave enough to cross her path. Many who leave the jail do so with stories etched in their memories, tales of a spectral woman who embodies the very essence of sorrow and retribution. The old Charleston jail stands as a chilling testament to Lavinia's enduring legacy, a reminder that some spirits are not easily laid to rest, and some stories refuse to fade into the shadows. If you would like further adjustments or additions, feel free to let me know. Story 4, The Myrtles Plantation, The Haunting of Chloe. Nestled among the sprawling oaks and lush greenery of St. Francisville, Louisiana, the Myrtles Plantation stands as a haunting relic of America's dark history. A place where echoes of the past seem to whisper through the very walls of the house. Often referred to as one of the most haunted homes in the United States, it is shrouded in legends and ghostly tales, with one spirit in particular capturing the imagination of all who visit. Chloe, the enslaved woman whose tragic fate left an indelible mark on the plantation. Chloe was said to be a beautiful young slave who worked in the plantation house, serving the family of General David Bradford and his wife, Elizabeth. While the plantation flourished, Chloe's life was marked by servitude and a desire for freedom, making her yearn for a life beyond the confines of her existence. The tension in her life grew when she became involved in a secret affair with the master of the house, which she thought might bring her closer to the freedom she craved. However, when her love was discovered, she faced severe consequences. To punish her, the Bradfords had Chloe's ear sliced off, a brutal act meant to humiliate and control her. In a desperate bid to regain favor and ensure her survival, Chloe resorted to a sinister act. She baked a cake laced with poison, hoping to incapacitate the Bradford family so she could escape and start anew. Tragically, her plan backfired. Instead of the intended target, it was Elizabeth and 2 of her children who succumbed to the deadly cake, leaving behind a horrific scene in the once happy home. With the Bradfords mourning their loss, Chloe's fate was sealed. Fearing for her life, she fled into the nearby woods, but the curse of her actions haunted her even there. It's said that, driven by guilt and the weight of her decisions, Chloe returned to the plantation, where she was eventually discovered and captured. The exact details of her death are shrouded in mystery. Some say she was hanged from a tree, while others claim she met a more grisly end at the hands of the outraged community. What remains is the haunting of her spirit, forever trapped within the walls of the Myrtles Plantation. Visitors to the Myrtles Plantation often report chilling encounters with Chloe's ghost. Many have claimed to see her wandering the grounds, dressed in a tattered green dress, her once beautiful face now a mask of sorrow and longing. As night falls, the air thickens with an otherworldly presence, and those who dare to explore the plantation grounds can feel the weight of her tragic history pressing upon them. The plantation house itself seems to come alive after dark. Shadows flit past the windows, and whispers float through the hallways, beckoning visitors to delve deeper into the enigma of Chloe's past. The dining room, where the Bradfords once gathered for lavish meals, is often the epicenter of ghostly activity. Guests have reported feeling a cold breeze brush against their skin, and some claim to have seen plates and glasses shifting, as if unseen hands were serving an otherworldly feast. One particularly chilling account comes from a couple who stayed overnight at the Myrtles. As they settled in for the night, they were drawn to the large parlor, its old furniture casting eerie shapes in the dim light. Suddenly, the woman felt a tug at her hair, a sensation so vivid that she instinctively turned, half expecting to find someone standing behind her. Instead, she was met with nothing but darkness. Moments later, the couple heard the faint sound of a child laughing, a haunting melody that echoed through the halls, sending shivers down their spines. As the night wore on, the couple decided to retire to their room, hoping to escape the strange occurrences. But as they lay in bed, sleep eluded them. The oppressive silence was pierced by the sound of soft footsteps shuffling outside their door. With hearts pounding, they exchanged anxious glances, too terrified to investigate. The footsteps stopped, and the air grew thick with tension. Suddenly, the door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness. They could feel a cold presence wash over them, chilling them to their very cores. Another visitor, a skeptic who came to debunk the stories surrounding the Myrtles, found himself reevaluating his beliefs after experiencing a night of sheer terror. Armed with a camera and recording equipment, he ventured into the haunted halls, determined to capture proof of the supernatural. As he roamed through the dimly lit corridors, he felt a sudden drop in temperature. The air grew heavy, and he sensed that he was not alone. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the hall, causing him to jump. Heart racing, he spun around to find a mirror hanging crookedly on the wall, though he was certain it had been straight just moments before. In that mirror, he caught a glimpse of a figure, a woman in a green dress, her eyes hollow, staring back at him with an expression of sorrow and desperation. In that instant, he realized that Chloe was watching, her spirit still bound to the plantation, yearning for recognition and a chance at redemption. The next day, shaken by his experience, he shared his story with other guests, many of whom had their own encounters to recount. The tales of Chloe echoed through the plantation, weaving a tapestry of sorrow and longing that enveloped all who entered. Some believe that she seeks forgiveness for her tragic actions, while others suggest she merely wishes to connect with the living, her spirit eternally intertwined with the land she once knew as home. The Myrtles plantation has become a place of pilgrimage for ghost hunters and those curious about the supernatural, each visitor drawn by the promise of encountering Chloe's spirit. Some come seeking thrills, while others come to pay their respects to a woman trapped in the throes of a haunted past. But one thing remains certain: Chloe's story is far from over. As night descends upon the Myrtles, the moon casts a ghostly glow over the plantation, and the whispers of the past echo through the trees. Those who tread upon the soil of the Myrtles plantation find themselves immersed in a story of love, betrayal, and haunting regret, with Chloe's spirit serving as a constant reminder that the past can never truly be forgotten. Whether a ghost or a legend, her presence lingers, weaving through the fabric of the plantation, inviting all who enter to share in her tragic tale, while leaving them forever changed by the chilling embrace of the supernatural. Story 5, Moundsville Penitentiary, the eternal haunt of lost souls. The Moundsville Penitentiary, a foreboding relic of American history, casts an imposing shadow over the small town of Moundsville, West Virginia. Built in 1866, its cold, Gothic architecture looms like a silent guardian of dark secrets. To the untrained eye, it may appear as nothing more than an abandoned relic of the past, but those who have set foot within its decaying walls know that something far more sinister lurks in its depths. It is said that the souls of the damned still walk its dark corridors, their restless spirits trapped in a purgatory of despair, and for over a century, Moundsville has been a beacon for the supernatural, attracting thrill seekers and investigators alike. The stories of paranormal activity at Moundsville Penitentiary are endless, spanning decades of unexplained phenomena. The tales speak of shadowy figures that dart out of sight, sudden drops in temperature that freeze the marrow, disembodied voices that echo through the empty halls, and the overwhelming sense of despair that grips anyone brave enough to stay after dark. One of the most infamous areas of the penitentiary is North Hall, home to the prison's most dangerous and violent criminals. It was here that inmates were subjected to unspeakable conditions, many of them confined to solitary cells no larger than a coffin, with barely enough light to see their hands in front of their faces. The stench of rot and death clung to the walls, and the air was thick with suffering. Many inmates, driven mad by the isolation, would claw at the walls until their fingers bled, screaming for release from their hellish existence. But for many, that release never came. Their spirits remain, wandering the halls, seeking the freedom that was denied to them in life. The most notorious spirit said to haunt the prison is that of Red Snyder, a violent and ruthless killer who ruled North Hall with an iron fist. Even the guards feared him, and his fellow inmates knew better than to cross him. Red met a violent end himself when he was stabbed to death by another inmate in a bloody feud. But his death did not bring peace. Visitors and staff have reported seeing his spectral figure prowling the halls of North Hall, his eyes glowing with a fiery hatred, as if still seeking revenge from beyond the grave. Others have claimed to hear his voice, whispering threats in the dead of night, filling the prison with an eerie tension. And then there is the tale of cold-blooded McGee, another ruthless killer who terrorized both inmates and guards. McGee, a man devoid of remorse, was infamous for his sadistic tendencies. He took pleasure in tormenting those around him, and it was said that his very presence could chill the blood of anyone unfortunate enough to encounter him. He met his end in his cell after a violent struggle with several guards, but his death was anything but peaceful. McGee's spirit, twisted with anger and resentment, is said to linger in his old cell, waiting for the opportunity to unleash his fury on anyone who dares to enter. The Sugar Shack, once the site of the prisoners' recreation area, is another hotbed of paranormal activity. Although it was meant to provide a brief respite from the harsh conditions of the prison, the Sugar Shack became a place of violence and depravity. Inmates used the area to settle scores, often resulting in brutal beatings and even murder. The walls of the Sugar Shack absorbed the violence, and now, long after the last prisoner left, the echoes of those brutal confrontations still remain. Visitors report hearing the sounds of fists striking flesh, anguished cries, and the soft murmur of voices, as if the ghosts of the past are reenacting their final moments. One of the most chilling tales from Moundsville is the legend of the Shadow Man, a dark figure that has been seen by numerous visitors and staff over the years. He is described as a tall, hulking figure, often seen in the lower levels of the prison. His features are indistinct, but those who have seen him describe a deep, suffocating sense of dread that accompanies his presence. The Shadow Man is not bound by the physical laws of the living. He appears and disappears at will, vanishing into thin air or passing through walls. Some believe that he is not the spirit of a former inmate, but something far darker, a malevolent entity drawn to the suffering and pain that permeates Moundsville's walls. The prison's death house, where executions were carried out, is another focal point for the paranormal. Over the years, hundreds of men met their end in the electric chair, known to the inmates as Old Sparky. Those who were sentenced to death spent their final hours in the death row cells, just a few feet away from the very device that would end their lives. The fear and anguish that filled those cells have left a permanent mark, and many visitors have reported an overwhelming sense of dread when standing near Old Sparky. Some claim to have seen the spirits of the condemned still waiting for their final judgment, their faces twisted in agony as they relive their final moments over and over again. But perhaps the most unsettling experiences come from those who have stayed overnight in Moundsville, participating in the prison's infamous ghost tours. Many have left with stories of objects moving on their own, doors slamming shut, and whispers in the dark. One group of paranormal investigators even reported being physically touched by unseen hands, leaving scratches and bruises as proof of their encounter. The prison seems to come alive in the dead of night, as if the very walls are trying to communicate the horrors they have witnessed. For years, Moundsville Penitentiary has stood as a monument to humanity's capacity for cruelty and suffering. It is a place where the lines between the living and the dead blur, where the past refuses to stay buried, and where the souls of the damned are forever trapped in an endless cycle of torment. As the sun sets and the shadows grow long, the true nature of Moundsville reveals itself. It is more than just a haunted prison. It is a gateway to the darkness that lies within us all. For those brave enough to venture inside, Moundsville offers an experience unlike any other. But be warned, the spirits that dwell within its walls are not content to remain in the past. They are waiting, watching, and reaching out from beyond the grave. If you listen closely, you might just hear their whispers, calling you to join them in the darkness. And once you enter, you may never leave. Story 6, The Haunting of the Stanley Hotel, where spirits never rest. The Stanley Hotel, perched on the edge of the Rocky Mountains in Estes Park, Colorado, is a place where history and horror blend together in eerie harmony. This sprawling, stately hotel, with its gleaming white facade and grand, red-roofed turrets, is as beautiful as it is haunted. For decades, visitors have marveled at its elegance, only to find themselves swept into a nightmare as night falls. Beneath the picturesque charm lies a dark past, filled with whispers, shadows, and spirits that refuse to leave. It is no coincidence that this very hotel inspired Stephen King's iconic horror novel, The Shining. The Stanley Hotel's haunted reputation has stretched across decades, fueled by countless reports of supernatural phenomena. But the terror that lurks here is no mere fiction. This is a place where the veil between the living and the dead is thin, and those brave enough to step into its halls risk encountering more than just a fleeting chill. Perhaps the most infamous location within the hotel is room 217, a suite forever etched into the annals of horror. In 1911, a tragic gas explosion nearly claimed the life of a housekeeper named Elizabeth Wilson. Though she survived, her spirit appears to have remained bound to the room. Guests who stay here often report bizarre occurrences. Items mysteriously moved, their suitcases unpacked while they sleep, and a strange presence in the air. But it's the stories of shadowy figures that truly disturb those who dare to stay. Visitors have woken in the dead of night, feeling the weight of something pressing on their beds, as if an invisible presence has climbed in beside them. Some say they've felt icy fingers brush their skin, or the sensation of someone breathing softly next to them, only to find the room empty when they turn on the light. The terror in room 217 is palpable, an oppressive energy that makes the air feel heavy and sends an instinctive shiver down your spine, as though someone or something is always watching. The Stanley Hotel's ballroom, once a place of lavish celebrations and elegant dances, now echoes with the sounds of an invisible orchestra. Many guests and staff have heard the eerie sound of a piano playing late into the night, though no one is ever seated at the grand piano. Sometimes ghostly footsteps accompany the music, as if long-dead guests are still waltzing across the polished wooden floor. There is a particular story of a wedding party that spent the night in the ballroom, only to be interrupted by the sound of clinking glasses and faint laughter. Yet when they investigated, they found the room empty, the tables undisturbed. Some claim the ghost of Freeland Stanley, the hotel's original owner, is responsible for the supernatural serenades. His spirit, dressed in formal attire, has been seen standing near the grand staircase, silently observing those who pass through, as though he is still the master of the house, never quite ready to let go. The fourth floor of the Stanley Hotel holds a sinister reputation. Once used as housing for the staff, this floor is now the epicenter of the hotel's most terrifying hauntings. Guests who stay here often hear the laughter of children, their giggles bouncing off the walls in the dead of night. But when the doors are opened, no children are ever found. Some have heard the unsettling sound of tiny footsteps running down the hall, followed by the distant echo of a child's voice whispering in their ear. The soft sound of a bouncing ball has been reported in the corridor, yet the source of the sound remains a mystery. There's one particular room on the fourth floor, room 401, where guests have felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Visitors have reported seeing the figure of a man standing by the window, staring out into the night. When they approach, the figure vanishes, leaving behind only a chill in the air and a sense of unease. Some say this man is a former guest who took his own life within the room, while others believe him to be one of the many spirits trapped in the hotel's haunted halls. Among the most disturbing spirits is that of Paul, a former maintenance worker who met his tragic end after suffering a fatal heart attack while shoveling snow outside the hotel. But his presence is still felt, particularly in the basement and maintenance areas. His ghost is known for being mischievous, flicking lights on and off, slamming doors and making guests feel unwelcome. Perhaps the most unnerving reports involve hearing Paul's voice, deep and guttural, telling guests to leave. "Get out," he growls, sending icy terror straight into their bones. Some visitors have been physically pushed or felt a sharp, invisible tug on their clothing while exploring the basement, an unseen force urging them to flee. Those who encounter Paul's spirit often speak of an overwhelming sense of fear, as if they're trespassing on forbidden ground. The Stanley Hotel holds a dark magnetism that draws both the living and the dead into its grip. Beyond the haunted rooms, corridors, and the ghostly piano melodies, the entire building pulses with a strange, inexplicable energy. Visitors who come expecting a peaceful night in the mountains often leave with far more than they bargained for. Some guests have even claimed to see full-bodied apparitions, transparent figures wandering the halls, only to vanish when approached. Others have reported strange cold spots in otherwise warm rooms and the unnerving feeling of being watched from the shadows. It is said that the Stanley's halls whisper with secrets, the voices of the past lingering just out of reach. But perhaps the most unsettling part of the Stanley Hotel is that it doesn't feel empty. Whether it's the lingering energy of past guests or the spirits of those who died here, there is always something or someone lurking just out of sight. The feeling of being watched, the fleeting whispers in the dead of night, and the unexplained noises that echo through the halls make it clear that at the Stanley Hotel, the dead are never truly gone. So if you ever find yourself brave enough to stay at the Stanley, remember, you are not alone. The spirits of the past are always there, waiting. And when the lights go out and the silence sets in, you might just hear them, whispering your name from the dark corners of your room. Will you dare to listen? Story 7. The Curse of Greyfriars Kirkyard, the Ghost of Bloody Mackenzie. Deep in the heart of Edinburgh, Scotland, lies Greyfriars Kirkyard, an ancient cemetery whose weathered tombstones lean precariously under the weight of centuries of history. The towering stone walls enclose the burial ground like a fortress, keeping the living out, or perhaps keeping something far darker in. Greyfriars is no ordinary graveyard. This is a place where the dead do not rest easily, and where one spirit in particular has made its presence known in terrifying and violent ways. This is the domain of George Mackenzie, or as he is more infamously known, Bloody Mackenzie. The story of Mackenzie is as sinister as it is chilling. He was a ruthless judge in the 17th century, responsible for the deaths and suffering of countless Covenanters, Presbyterian rebels who refused to submit to the king's rule. Mackenzie's cruelty knew no bounds. He sentenced hundreds to death and torture, their bodies thrown into mass graves without a second thought. But it seems that the souls of the tortured do not forgive easily. And Mackenzie's final resting place at Greyfriars Kirkyard has become a focal point of supernatural horror. At the heart of Greyfriars stands the Black Mausoleum, an imposing stone structure where George Mackenzie's body was interred after his death. It is here where the hauntings begin. The crypt itself seems to breathe with a malevolent energy, as if the very stones are saturated with the horrors Mackenzie inflicted in life. Visitors who venture too close to the mausoleum often report an overwhelming sense of dread, a feeling as though something dark and ancient is watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. Those foolish enough to peer through the cracks in the crypt's door claim to see shadowy figures moving inside, shapes that flit just out of sight as though something is lurking in the darkness, eager to escape. And then there are the voices, faint and distant at first, but growing louder the longer you stay. They say that if you listen closely, you can hear the screams of the Covenanters, Mackenzie condemned to death, their agony echoing through the centuries. But it's not just sounds and shadows that plague those who visit Mackenzie's tomb. The hauntings here are far more physical and far more violent. The Mackenzie poltergeist is no mere ghost. It is an entity driven by rage, a vengeful spirit that lashes out at those who come too close. The attacks began in the late 1990s, when a homeless man seeking shelter from the cold broke into the Black Mausoleum. What happened to him inside remains a mystery, but when he was found, he was delirious, his face twisted in terror. From that moment, the graveyard seemed to awaken, and the attacks began. Visitors to the kirkyard often leave with inexplicable injuries, bruises, scratches, burns, marks that appear as if an unseen force has reached out and physically harmed them. People have been knocked to the ground by an invisible hand, their throats gripped by something cold and unyielding. The poltergeist's attacks are relentless, striking without warning, leaving its victims disoriented and terrified. One woman, during a ghost tour, collapsed outside the Black Mausoleum, gasping for air as invisible fingers seemed to tighten around her throat. Her friends watched in horror as her face turned pale and bruises began to bloom around her neck, as though she were being strangled by a phantom. When she was finally released, she could barely speak, her voice hoarse from the unseen assault. The only explanation she could offer was that she had felt an overwhelming hatred, an intense malice that seemed to radiate from the crypt, enveloping her in its dark embrace. The violence of Mackenzie's ghost is not limited to random attacks. Many believe that anyone who disturbs his tomb risks awakening his wrath. Over the years, several attempts have been made to exorcise the mausoleum, but all have failed. Some of the priests and paranormal investigators who have dared to enter have fallen ill shortly after, plagued by nightmares of faceless figures reaching out to them from the dark. Others have experienced extreme bad luck, their lives falling into chaos as if cursed by the very spirit they sought to banish. One priest, determined to rid Greyfriars of its malevolent presence, entered the mausoleum with a cross in hand and prayers on his lips. He emerged less than an hour later, trembling and drenched in sweat. He would not speak of what he had seen inside, but his hands shook as he muttered, "It's angry, so angry." He left Edinburgh shortly after and was never seen again. The locals say that Mackenzie's spirit cannot be contained, that the evil he inflicted in life has tethered him to the world of the living, turning him into a force of rage and vengeance. His victims, too, are said to linger in the shadows, their restless souls trapped in an eternal cycle of suffering, forever bound to the place where they were condemned to die. Greyfriars Kirkyard is not just a haunted cemetery. It is a place alive with malevolent energy. The air grows colder the deeper you walk into the graveyard. The wind seems to whisper secrets, and the shadows stretch longer as dusk falls. There is something unnatural here, something that seems to watch your every move. Those brave enough to visit at night often describe the eerie sensation of being followed, of footsteps echoing behind them though no one else is around. Some have seen figures standing between the gravestones, their faces obscured by the darkness, their eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. But when approached, these figures vanish, leaving only the lingering sense that they were never truly alone. Visitors leave Greyfriars with more than just stories. They leave with the haunting feeling that something has followed them home. Strange dreams plague those who dare walk its grounds, dreams of cold hands reaching out from the graves, of blackened eyes staring from the shadows, of George Mackenzie himself, his ghostly figure draped in shadow, watching from his tomb, waiting for the next soul to disturb his eternal rest. The legend of Bloody Mackenzie continues to grow, with each new visitor adding their own terrifying experience to the tale. Greyfriars Kirkyard stands as a monument to death, not just in the physical sense, but to the darker forces that linger long after the body has decayed. This is a place where the past refuses to die, and where the dead reach out from their graves to remind the living of the horrors that once were, and of the horrors still to come. If you ever find yourself wandering the ancient paths of Greyfriars Kirkyard, take heed. Do not approach the Black Mausoleum, and do not tempt the wrath of Bloody Mackenzie. For in this haunted place, the dead do not sleep. They watch, they wait, and sometimes they strike.